register of licensees. So if you are a licensee, you will be on a public register. So everybody would know who is and who is not a licensee. So you know when you are buying your medical cannabis according to your prescription, and you must have it in a specific form and potency, and you go to a dispensary, you can find out right away whether that is a licensed dispensary or not, to ensure that you are getting the quality of the medicinal product that you need. The Cannabis Authority develops enforcement procedures and provides for the electronic tracking and handling of cannabis wherever it may go, in whatever form it may take. Under the proposed regime, cannabis will only be legally accessible for medicinal, scientific, and religious purposes. This is not a recreational use legislative framework. Recreational use outside of the framework we speak today is still against the law. Still against the law. In this regard, the bill provides for multiple licenses, and each license will have obligations to the authority, depending on what they are. You have a cultivation license to permit the growing, harvesting, drying, trimming, curing, and packaging of cannabis. You have a retail license for the sale of cannabis and cannabis accessories for medicinal, scientific, and research purposes, and the operation of a cannabis dispensary and a therapeutic facility. You have an analytical testing license. Remember I said that the cannabis has to be tested through the whole process, and you need analytical testing. Well, you will have testing labs that will be licensed separately. You have a manufacturing license. So cannabis can be manufactured into different forms. So whether that be oils, forms of edibles, these are all processed and manufactured, right? And you have a separate manufacturing license for the manufacturing and packaging of cannabis and cannabis accessories. A research license to conduct scientific research on cannabis related to the development of different products or strains or applications. So you can have a purely scientific element of this, and we'll be subject to a research license. So imagine, we may have major medical universities who want to come to the Bahamas for the purpose of researching cannabis. And we have a framework in place to allow that to happen. You have a transport license, so you have to be separately licensed to actually transport cannabis from place to place. Sounds like something you would be interested in, man.
For the transport industry.
That's what I'm saying.
All right.
You're a leader in the industry. The transport license is for the transport and delivery of cannabis throughout the Bahamas. And I'm a boater, so you can drive it, I can take it in the boat.
There you go.
And you have finally a religious use license for the distribution of cannabis for religious purposes. So as you can see, all the elements are subject to separate licensure and regulatory frameworks for each component.
No bundling there. No bundling there, AG. No bundling.
Clause 18 of the Cannabis Bill provides for the eligibility and requirements for a license. An applicant who is an individual, a natural person, must be a citizen of the Bahamas and at least 21 years old. The applicant who is a legal entity must be 100% Bahamian owned if they're applying for a cultivation, retail, transport, or religious use license. So those licenses are reserved entirely for Bahamians. Entirely for Bahamians. And it must be a minimum of 30% Bahamian owned if they're applying for analytical testing, manufacturing, or research. Now, it's important to note that we want to ensure that the jurisdiction is competitive with our peers in the cannabis industry, because the fact of the matter is this has an industrial component to it, right? Our regional peers, such as Barbados, allow up to 70% foreign investment. And so we use that as a benchmark. We felt it important to be in line with our peers. Right? There are many Bahamians looking at opportunities in this industry. Right? And so we want to remain competitive. We also wanted to ensure that the areas that require the most technical expertise, analytical testing and manufacturing, technical expertise, and the ones that require the most capital investment. A manufacturing facility can cost millions of dollars in capital expenditure, millions of dollars. We allowed for joint venture opportunities. Remember, this was in our blueprint for change. We spoke about allowing joint venture opportunities for Bahamians. That's what we said we would do. We said that. This allows for joint venture opportunities with Bahamians, and therefore we wanted Bahamians to have maximum flexibility in structuring their business and investment structure. This is not a mandate. It's an option. This is not a mandate. Just a minimum framework and set of rules that you have to abide by. We fully support and we encourage 100% Bahamian ownership in manufacturing and 100% Bahamian ownership in analytical testing. And we want to see that happen. But we don't want to restrict the ability of Bahamians participating in those, because chances are you're going to need expertise, and sometimes that expertise wants to have skin in the game. And so we want to give the flexibility to Bahamians to structure their business as they deem fit. Pharmacies and dispensaries are to be operated by persons, remember, these are to be owned by Bahamians, dispensaries. The retail side is a Bahamian-owned business. Operated by persons who are registered and licensed under the Pharmacy Act and the Health Professionals Act, respectively. The Cannabis Bill, the Pharmacy Amendment Bill, together with the Health Professions Amendments and the Cannabis Regulations, envision the operation of, one, a pharmacy, which provides cannabis to patients and other licensees. So if you're a licensed pharmacy, you're automatically entitled, naturally, to distribute medical cannabis pursuant to a prescription. Right? We also provide for a cannabis dispensary, which will only provide and dispense cannabis to patients. So they won't be able to sell any other type of drug. Only medical cannabis to patients subject to a prescription. And we allow for a therapeutic facility in which cannabis therapy can be lawfully administered. So your doctor or medical professional may want you to take the medicine, take the medicinal cannabis, subject to medical oversight. And a therapeutic facility is a licensed facility that allows you to take the prescription with the oversight of a doctor. The amendments to the Pharmacy Act, the Health Professional Act, and the Hospitals and Healthcare Facilities Act seek to provide for the creation of the health profession of a cannabis dispenser, the type of pharmacy to be known as a cannabis dispensary, in which it's only allowed to dispense medicinal cannabis, and that's where a cannabis dispenser will be employed. And like I said, a therapeutic facility for the treatment of qualifying medical conditions. It should be noticed that the license for a therapeutic facility also has to have a dispensary or a pharmacy license to dispense, and then the therapeutic facility allows you to have the therapy there. Therapeutic facilities will be subject to the same regulations as all other healthcare facilities under the Hospitals and Healthcare Facilities Act. Now, I think it's important to say that with respect to this framework, the retail side of this, we had extensive consultation with the medical community, as well as pharmacy professionals, and we made some amendments to the bills we had originally released for consultation based on their feedback. And those amendments are incorporated into what we debate today. For example, when it comes to visitors coming to the Bahamas who have a medical ailment and possibly a medical card from their jurisdiction that says that they have to have prescribed medical cannabis, a medical doctor will have to issue that prescription. A medical doctor in the Bahamas will have to issue that prescription, regardless if they have a medical card in their home jurisdiction. How it was originally crafted is we would have accepted the medical card and medical diagnosis of acceptable jurisdictions. Right? We consulted with the medical community. They said, no, well, this is in the Bahamas and we should be issuing the prescription. We accepted that and we made the change. We made the change, right? And the medical community said, you know, we can do teleconsults and video consults with the patient, or in-person consults, whatever, right? As long as it's up to their standards and regulations. So we made that amendment based upon that consultation. With respect to cannabis dispensaries, we made an amendment to require a licensed pharmacist to be affiliated with a cannabis dispensary. Before, there was no affiliation. You would have a dispenser, properly trained and properly certified, allowed to dispense. The pharmacy community said, well, we would feel more comfortable if a pharmacist was related to the dispensary, because ultimately they will bring that level of oversight. So we made that amendment, right? That amendment has been made. We also agreed, after consultation with the Pharmacy Association, to work in partnership with them, with the association, on the education and certification requirements for a cannabis dispenser. And so through that consultation, we made some adjustments and we're working together with the industry. The cannabis bill also ensures that the use of cannabis as a sacrament by parishioners of the Rastafarian faith, when handled under a religious use license, have to be licensed, have to be subject to the same requirements and compliance requirements in the legislation, but that would be lawful. This part of the cannabis bill was benchmarked on approaches taken by countries such as Jamaica and Barbados, with whom we share similar cultural and religious backgrounds, as well as similar legal systems. Colleagues should be aware that some Caribbean jurisdictions have recognized that the freedom of religion, the conscience provision of the Constitution, covers the rights of Rastafarians to use cannabis in the exercise of their religion. So the regional trend is that it is recognized that the use of cannabis as a sacrament in the religious faith of Rastafarianism is a constitutionally protected right. That is the trend in the region. In fact, there is a case, Maccabee out of St. Kitts and Nevis, in which the St. Kitts and Nevis Drugs Prevention and Abatement of Misuse of Abuse of Drugs Act was declared inconsistent with and infringed upon Maccabee's constitutional right of freedom of conscience and religion. In other words, in some of the Southern Caribbean, the courts have held legally the determination that the use of cannabis in the Rastafarian faith as a sacrament is a constitutionally protected right based on freedom of religion. That case is going to be heard by their highest court, and once that is heard, that will then become the standard and the norm for the use of cannabis by the Rastafarian faith in their religion. That's without a license, you're correct. It's important that we have a regulatory framework to address this issue. We must get ahead and at least establish the framework of which it will be utilized in the Bahamas. And we believe it is the right thing to do. We do not think it's right to criminalize an entire religion because of the use of their sacrament in their religious activities. We don't believe that. And that is why we have taken the approach that we've taken. And we're making the change. And yes, not everybody's going to be happy with the middle ground that we have chosen. But that's why it's a middle ground. We listened to the Rastafarian leaders. We looked at the benchmarks around the region. From a policy point of view, we took a position that we were comfortable with and that we thought was appropriate within the regime in which we are putting forth. And yes, we will continue to listen to the Rastafarian religion. In fact, we made an amendment to this provision based on our consultations with them. So colleagues may or may not know there are multiple denominations within the Rastafarian faith. Some denominations partake in their sacrament at the tabernacle in a group. Some denominations in the Rastafarian faith do not. And it's not used at their tabernacle. It's used more at home in a personal meditative setting. Right? How we had it originally drafted, you had to partake at the tabernacle. We listened to the different denominations and their input, and we made the change. And we made the change. And so it's either at the tabernacle or in a private abode or accommodation, but never in public. Never in public. This bill does not allow anywhere for public use. So I just wanted to make clear our approach and where we have seen the region going, the legal basis behind some of this, and why we chose a middle regulated ground. On the actual administration of this regime by the Cannabis Authority, there will be a confidential database designated to facilitate the electronic tracking of cannabis and reporting by medical practitioners and licensees, which includes pharmacists and dispensers. Medical practitioners, by virtue of Clause 43, are able to create an electronic prescription for their patients, which will likewise be administered through a confidential database. This electronic prescription, this won't be a prescription where you see, Dr. Wright in his scribbly handwriting. You can't read it, but the pharmacist could read it and gives it to you to go to the pharmacist, right? And this won't be a circumstance where the medical doctor picks up the phone and calls the pharmacist to call in a prescription. This will be administered through an electronic database where the medical practitioner will upload the prescription into the database, and then when you go to fill your prescription, that dispenser or pharmacy will then be able to pull the prescription out of the database all through the regulated authority. So there's no ad hoc, no risk of abuse here. It's a controlled process. Both the medical practitioner and the pharmacist will be able to view the patient's cannabis dispensing history, which is critical in detecting and deterring abuse. So for example, if you see one doctor is prescribing 50% of the prescriptions, that's possibility of abuse. That's a red flag, right? If you see one dispensary dispensing a disproportionate amount of medical cannabis, you know that might be a red flag and that you would have to inspect that. So this is a process that is in place to deter abuse. The bill also seeks to implement a fixed penalty for unlawful possession of small amounts of cannabis, less than 30 grams. An officer may serve a person committing an offense with a fixed penalty notice, which requires him to pay the fine of $250 before the date specified in the notice. If the offender does not pay the fine within the specified time, if he does pay the fine, he should not have a record for committing the offense. In other words, we are decriminalizing the possession of less than 30 grams of cannabis and creating a framework where it is punishable by fine alone and not a criminal prosecution. This is an important change, especially for the youth of our country, who, when there is a conviction for a small amount of cannabis, that individual is now foreclosed from opportunities in the workplace, opportunities in the public sector, private sector, travel opportunities. He's branded a criminal when it may only be a small amount, and it is wrong. It is wrong to do that, and we are changing that. We are liberating scores of young Bahamians who have been held back. We are likewise expunging records that already exist on your police record for possession of small amounts of cannabis. So those who already have had a conviction of small amounts of cannabis, and that conviction has held them back from employment, from job opportunities, and have been branded as a criminal for having cannabis alone, your record will be expunged. Gone. Deemed spent.
Clean state.
That is the right thing to do. We are liberating scores of Bahamians from a conviction for an offense that frankly is petty. That's petty. Madam President, as I conclude, I want to make clear that we ensured that there was extensive public consultation on this compendium of bills. We held closed consultations with a variety of relevant constituents so they could speak freely with us. And we listened. We published the compendium of bills for public review and consultation. We published the CARICOM report. We published the Marijuana Commission report. We published all of the information for Bahamians to read. We received comments and feedback of which we took into account. We took them all into consideration and, in fact, made certain revisions based upon the comments. Bless you. The compendium we debate today is the result of extensive benchmarking and analysis and a lot of hard work by the Ministry of Health and the Office of the Attorney General, along with the input and engagement of Bahamians the country over. I want to recognize the Minister of Health, my good friend Michael Darville, for his tireless work and commitment to this regime. I look forward to the successful implementation and a Bahamas where patient ailments obtain relief, where Rastafarians have the respect of allowing them to partake in their sacrament without criminal prosecution, and where scientific research in the Bahamas, where new agricultural technology is discovered, and where Bahamians have economic opportunities that arise from this regulated framework we debate and we pass today. Madam President, with that, I move for the second reading of the Cannabis Bill 2024, which is a bill for an act to regulate the handling of cannabis and the establishment of the Cannabis Authority. Do I need to do each one separately? Okay, just the one. No problem. So I move for the second reading of a bill for an act to regulate the handling of cannabis and the establishment of the Cannabis Authority. So moved.
Thank you, Senator the Honorable Ryan Pinder. Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Randy Roll.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Wish to congratulate the Attorney General on an excellent contribution just now, and certainly for many Bahamians, young persons as well, the opportunity to regularize. Madam President, right before I get started, through you, permit me the opportunity, first of all, to send condolences to my brother and friend, the Honorable Miles Laroda, who would have lost a son this weekend. Certainly, Madam President, I have two sons myself, and the thought of having something happen to them is very hurtful, and so I wish him and his family Godspeed as they go through this time of sorrow. I also wish to pay condolences to the former Clerk of the House, Mr. Maurice Tynes, who I understand also lost a son this past week as well. And so to him and his family, I extend condolences to them as well. And last but not least, as our Prime Minister goes through a small procedure today overseas, I wish him all the best and hope to see him home soon as he recovers and continues the work of the Bahamian people. Madam President, this comprehensive cannabis bill was designed to regulate an industry that is not new to the Bahamas. It's not new because for decades, Madam President, it was illegally sold and distributed here. What this bill seeks to do is to create a tightly regulated industry where patients via their physicians can get cannabis that is safe to manage in different disease states. This will give physicians, Madam President, and their patients a new and legal treatment option, which will better equip doctors to treat some of the difficult health issues. Madam President, I wish to applaud the Attorney General, the Minister of Health, and their team for their determined, dedicated, and focused hard work and efforts that they place in bringing this bill to fruition. While this bill may not be perfect, Madam President, it aligns with global best practices as we see around the world. We have found that 70 countries, Madam President, around the world have legalized cannabis in some form for medical use, with 26 of these countries providing medical patients with legal access to high THC cannabis. 10 countries, Madam President, have legalized cannabis for adult use, with 6 adopting a system for regulated distributions. Included in this bill, Madam President, is an exemption for religious use, which will greatly benefit our Rastafarian brothers and sisters and no longer prevent them from practicing the sacramental use as established by that religion. Not only are Rastafarians benefiting from this religion exemption, Madam President, but other backgrounds as well, Handai and several others, will all have the right to practice their religious rights fully, Madam President. Can you imagine banning Catholics and Anglicans from using wine as a part of their religious ceremony? This, Madam President, is the right thing to do. While cannabis remains illegal in the Bahamas, it is still widely accessible to young people. And contrary to belief, Madam President, this bill would make the accessibility more difficult to this demographic. In this bill, we place an age restriction of 21 years old for those who wish to participate in this industry or to access cannabis. However, physicians will have the discretion as to who they deem fit based on a predetermined ailments. Cannabis, Madam President, could be used for and will have full confidence, and we have full confidence in our physicians to not abuse this discretion. As we know, they seek to do no harm. Madam President, some will say that this bill will increase the use of cannabis among youths, but studies done across the globe spectrum paint a different picture. And to the ones that say that it does not, were conducted without taking into consideration that previous studies were done on the backdrop of it being illegal at the time of the study, and the responses given were not truthful due to fear of prosecution. Madam President, I would also like to give credit to the former administration for the work that it did with regards to cannabis. The former administration created the Cannabis Commission, Madam President, whose mission was to codify the views of the Bahamian people about cannabis use in this country. This commission worked on this project for several years, and in 2021 presented its findings to the then Prime Minister. The summary of that findings is that the Bahamian people believe that cannabis should be allowed to be used to treat various medical conditions, and it will be a good treatment modified option for physicians to have to bring about relief to persons who may be suffering. The composition of the commission included, Madam President, a former high-ranking police officer who also happened to be a trained forensic scientist, a very senior member of the Christian community, a physician, a pharmacist, an attorney, and a senior servant police officer, a senior member of the Rastafarian community, a lecturer from the University of the Bahamas, a representative from the youth sector, and persons from civil society. The work done by this commission laid the groundwork for which this government builds. You see, Madam President, we are not a government of stop, cancel, and review. Rather, we examine the work done by previous administrations and build on it without having to duplicate efforts, which leads to wasted time and money. This bill, Madam President, told the report of that commission and through a series of consultations with various experts, global industry leaders, members of civil society, and taking into consideration our religious beliefs and cultural norms, came up with a bill that is safe, but yet comprehensive and compassionate. The compassion that I speak of is the fact that this bill will essentially expunge criminal records like the AG just spoke about, Madam President, for thousands of Bahamians who were convicted of simple possession and of small quantities of cannabis. This move, Madam President, will liberate for scores of people, especially our young men who, because of this criminal record, was unable to gainfully employed, were unable to travel, as well as unable to gain access to funding from mainstream financial institutions. To me, Madam President, this move is of equal importance as the health aspect, because health, Madam President, is more than just physical well-being. I am passionate about our young people because they are our future. And now this bill, Madam President, gives them a second chance and places them in a position to succeed. Madam President, as stated earlier, many countries across the globe have a robust medical cannabis industry. And as far as I'm concerned, Madam President, we are late to the game. Our neighbors to the north, namely the United States, have most states that have a medical marijuana law that allows for medical use of cannabis. In fact, Madam President, the federal government in a few months will move to deschedule cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. That means it will move from being viewed as a dangerous, highly addictive chemical that has very little to no medical value to a chemical that may be addictive but has some medical properties. This move, Madam President, by the United States federal government is well aligned as to what we are seeking to do here. And once again, we as a country will be in step with our U.S. partners and counterparts. Our Caribbean neighbors, Madam President, namely Jamaica in 2015, has established a medical cannabis industry. And since its establishment, Jamaica has seen significant growth in its revenue and has a forecast of 3.9% growth for the period of 24 to 2029. This growth, Madam President, rate can be reproduced right here in the Bahamas. And in fact, with over nearly 10 million visitors last year, Madam President, we can expect a projected growth rate that Jamaica is anticipating. Some might ask the question, Madam President, of who will be creating this industry for? Who are we creating this industry for? So, and I heard the AG address it, and I want to reiterate what he said as it relates to that. This bill, Madam President, calls for 100% Bahamian ownership. Let me say it again, Madam President. It calls for 100% Bahamian ownership. However, we recognize that foreign direct investment provides fuel to our economic engine. And so we also have in this bill for some areas where foreign participation is allowed. These areas in the cultivation, research, manufacturing, testing, and analytical aspects.
Good.
Okay, thanks.
Good stuff.
Analytical aspects of the industry. Even in the areas that they are permitted to participate, they must have a Bahamian partner as a natural person and not a company. This bill, Madam President, not only seeks to give physicians additional tools to treat diseases, it not only seeks to liberate many who were shackled by criminal records, but this bill, Madam President, also seeks to empower Bahamian men and women from all socioeconomic spheres. Madam President, this bill is truly a bill for all people. Continuing with our Caribbean brothers and sisters, Madam President, the CARICOM Regional Commission on Marijuana has called for a regional declassification of marijuana as a dangerous drug and declassified as a controlled substance that has medical qualities which can bring about positive health outcomes. In this bill, Madam President, there is a section that speaks to how the new industry will be regulated. It sets out how this bill will be done by forming the Bahamas Cannabis Authority. And again, the AG spoke on that, touched on that as well. This authority will be charged with the responsibility to develop policies, procedures, and guidelines to establish and regulate the cannabis for medical, therapeutic, scientific, and religious purposes. It will have the charge of ensuring that cannabis is handled in an efficient manner and sorted safely. It will be the authority that issues and revokes licenses in accordance with this act. It will keep a register of license issued under the act. It will develop enforcement procedures to ensure compliance with the provisions of this act. It will establish and maintain a confidential database electronically or otherwise. These are just some of the functions of the authority. And again, I thank the Minister of Health and our Attorney General for taking so much emphasis in making sure that this bill is done the right way. So, Madam President, this bill was well thought out and took consideration and a multifactored approach to its composition and will carry that approach throughout its execution. In summary, Madam President, this bill seeks to establish a medical cannabis industry which will provide patients and healthcare providers with additional options to manage disease states. It seeks to give a second chance to those convictions, has limited their options to be fully engaged in society and the economy. It seeks to grow the economy of the Bahamas by way of increasing local and foreign investments, branding the agriculture sector, enhancing visitor spending who need to access this product for health reasons, and it also has the potential to positively impact medical tourism. Madam President, it will be regulated and safe with checks and balances in the place that will make it difficult for fraud, abuse, and misuse. Senate colleagues and friends, this is what we mean when we say that this bill, when we say that we are changing the status quo. By doing away with outdated laws and forming newer ones that are progressive, ones that are forward-thinking and modern, we can truly make this country the best little country on earth. In closing, Madam President, I would like to state that I support this bill. And again, I thank this government for being brave, courageous, and resolute in bringing it to the Bahamian people. I support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator the Honorable Randy Roll, for your contribution. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a second time and committed. A bill for an act to regulate the handling of cannabis and the establishment of the Cannabis Authority. As many, the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Michaela Barnett Ellis.
Good morning, Madam President. Madam President, I want to open up my debate this morning by expressing condolences to the family of MCM Leroy Ware from Exuma. Madam President, the MCMs to the F&M family are extremely important because they are the shoulders, they are the men and women in which our party they've dedicated their lives to the party. And when we lose one, it's always a blow. And so I want to express my condolences to his family. I also want to say to you, Madam President, and to the wider Bahamian public, that COVID is still out and about. And its risk to persons with comorbidities remains the same. And so we must not drop our guard and get too relaxed. If you are sick, stay home, treat the symptoms, and come back out to play when the symptoms have dissipated. My contribution this morning, Madam President, is going to be short and Initially, I had short and sweet, but it's not really sweet, but it's going to be short. This compendium, Madam President, is a step forward, but it is far from perfect. To me, it seems to be a squat in between being a controlled substance and total legalization. And we, Madam President, must decide whether we're going to control it with the same vigor as our Bookie and Barabi tax enforcement task force with assault weapons, or whether we are going to dispense it with very loose oversight. But if we are going to control it, then it really should only be dispensed by pharmacists. And pharmacists should also sell wholesale to suppliers such as the Rastafarian congregation. Madam President, details are the things that make legislation work. Too often in regulations that aren't, the details are in the things that make legislation work, and those are the regulations. But unfortunately, regulations aren't subject to the same scrutiny as acts because they don't come before these houses. And so when I look at the bills before us, Madam President, several questions come to mind. Who can the cultivators sell to? Do pharmacists purchase from manufacturers, or do they purchase from the cultivators? And who is the Rastafarian community supposed to purchase from? Do they purchase directly from cultivators or from manufacturers? If this legislation is implemented without the proper resources and with too much government bureaucracy, or maybe not enough government bureaucracy, it could be a problem. We must give it the proper resources and policies, because this has the potential to be of benefit to the health and wealth of the Bahamas. And I smiled, Madam President, when the AG talked about the labs to test cannabis, because we're still looking for the labs to test DNA and forensic evidence. Madam President, rolling out legislation properly is where governments often fall short. It is at this point that things get mucked up. And so I call upon this government to depart from its usual pattern of behavior and intimately involve stakeholders in the rollout, those persons with their feet on the ground, and not simply to rely on technocrats who may have long since left practice. Let's make sure the records of those persons in possession of small quantities are expunged immediately. If there's anyone in prison or on remand for those offenses, may they be processed and released. There cannot be a delay in enactment like we have a delay in the Mental Health Act, which has still not been brought into force. This is an opportunity to be innovative and to truly make opportunities available to Bahamians. But I hope that this administration does not get too overly excited by the potential economic benefit and slap hefty fees for the licenses available in this bill. Hefty license fees, which only persons with significant capital can afford, can smother the prospective growth of this industry. Madam President, in my opinion, the government has failed in so many areas. They have not reintroduced the RISE program. They didn't pass anti-corruption legislation in the first 100 days. We don't feel safer. The economics of life still have us in a chokehold. They aren't transparent, and they've refused to be held accountable. they're spending too much of our money on glitz and glamour. I ask that this government give Baymans a glimmer of hope that this can be an industry that has not already been reserved for the usual friends and family of this administration. And with that, Madam President, I take my seat.
Thank you, Senator the Honorable Michael Barnett Ellis, for your contribution. As many, the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Darren Pickstock. Senator Pickstock, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, it's always a pleasure to be on the floor of the Senate to do the people's business. Just before I begin or commence my contribution, I was going to respond to Senator Barnett Ellis, but I would leave that to my learned colleague, Senator the Honorable Ryan Pinder. But suffice it to say, I wholeheartedly disagree with her assessment, and she is totally way off on her assessment of this legislation. Madam President, let me begin my contribution by firstly joining my Senate colleagues in extending condolences to the Honorable Miles LaRoda on the passing of his son. Like Senator Roll indicated, I too have a son, and it's very difficult to bury one's child. I can't imagine what that family must be going through, and we send our prayers to Minister LaRoda and his family. I would also like to send condolences to the former Chief Clerk, Maurice Tynes, on the loss of his son. Again, we send our prayers to him and his family. I'd like to also join my colleagues in wishing our Prime Minister, the Honorable Philip Brave Davis, well wishes with his minor procedure. We wish him well. Madam President, honorable senators and members of the public who we are speaking to today, it is with great honor and a deep sense of responsibility that I stand before you today to contribute to the Cannabis Bill 2024, which is supported by the Cannabis Regulations 2024. This landmark legislation proposes to legalize the use of cannabis for medical and religious purposes, decriminalize the possession of small amounts of cannabis, and regulate cannabis products within our borders. It sets out detailed licensing standards for various cannabis-related activities, including cultivation, sale, testing, and religious use. The regulations also cover the import and export of cannabis, as well as production, packaging, and marketing restrictions. As we deliberate on this bill, it is critical to consider its potential to significantly impact public health, social justice, economic growth, and individual freedoms within the Bahamas. The Cannabis Bill 2024 is a giant leap for our country. It offers, at long last, the modern 21st century medicinal relief to thousands of patients and their wellness. Medically prescribed cannabis will be a new path to comfort and healing for so many people. The bill also decriminalizes small quantities of cannabis, This puts an end to the century-old practice of giving marijuana, which is the colloquial name of cannabis, the bad break, social stigma it has received internationally for over a century. The Davis-led administration is again out front, courageous, and audacious and revolutionary in causing to happen in the Bahamas this legislation to take cannabis off the Dangerous Drugs Act and open the lawful cannabis industry to our country for medicinal and religious purposes. I say the PLP because it was promised to the Bahamian people in the party's general election manifesto, the Blueprint for Change, of the 2021 snap general elections. So said, so done. The learned Attorney General has once again taken his time, along with Senator the Honorable Randy Roll, taken his time and explained and explored every segment of this legislation in detail in this place. The facts are all before us, and we are, as a nation, now have before us what the legislation sets out to accomplish, how it intends to accomplish and manage and regulate what the Act is creating, and how the integrity of the Bahamas and the industry created from this legislation is to be protected. I would like to also join the Attorney General and Senator the Honorable Randy Roll in congratulating our Minister of Health, the Honorable Michael Darville, and his team for the work, the hard work, day in and day out, that they have put into bringing us to this point where we are now on the cusp of passing this legislation, this bill. The debate over cannabis legislation is not unique to the Bahamas. Around the world, nations are reevaluating their stance on cannabis, recognizing the historical injustices, the potential medical benefits, and the economic opportunities associated with its legalization and regulation. Countries like Canada, Uruguay, and numerous states within the United States have already taken steps to reform their cannabis laws and are further reforming their laws. Their experiences provide valuable insight and lessons that can guide our path further. For decades, cannabis has been stigmatized and criminalized, leading to widespread social, economic consequences, particularly for marginalized communities. The global shift towards legalization and decriminalization reflects a growing recognition of the need to address these consequences and to adopt a more evidence-based and humane approach to cannabis policy. In alignment with the PLP, with the government's Blueprint for Change, the party committed to developing a comprehensive regulatory framework for cannabis reform. This framework ensures the safe, ethical, and effective operation of the cannabis industry, covering processes of growing, harvesting, and exporting cannabis. The Davis-led administration aims to maintain high standards and minimize any potential negative impacts on the Bahamas' international reputation. Additionally, the Progressive Liberal Party promised to create economic opportunities for all Bahamians within the cannabis industry by ensuring equitable access and encouraging joint ventures through the Bahamas, through this industry. Special attention will be given to supporting small farmers and local businesses to promote inclusive economic growth and job creation. One of the primary pillars of the bill is for the legalization of cannabis for medical purposes. Extensive scientific research has demonstrated that cannabis has significant therapeutic potential. It has been shown to be effective in managing chronic pain, reducing nausea and vomiting associated with chemotherapy, alleviating symptoms of multiple sclerosis, and improving the quality of life for patients within various debilitating conditions. Medical cannabis can offer a safer alternative to opioids and other prescription medications, which often come with severe side effects and a high potential for addiction. By legalizing medical cannabis, we can provide patients with more options for managing their health and well-being. This bill outlines a rigorous regulatory framework to ensure that medical cannabis is prescribed responsibly and dispensed through licensed and controlled channels, ensuring patient safety and product quality. Cannabis has been used for religious purposes for centuries by various cultures and spiritual practices around the world. In the Bahamas, certain religious communities have long incorporated cannabis into their rituals and ceremonies, viewing it as a sacrament and a means to enhance spiritual experiences. The Cannabis Bill 2024 recognizes and respects the cultural and religious significance of cannabis. Only leaders of the Rastafarian faith with organizational licenses will be permitted to distribute cannabis as a sacrament to members within a place of worship. Alternatively, for individuals unaffiliated with an organization, a license may be granted for use in a secured private space at a residence or otherwise permitted by the provisions of this act, where an exempt permit may be granted. By legalizing the use of cannabis for religious purposes, we uphold the principles of religious freedom and cultural heritage. This aspect of the bill is designed to protect and support the rights of individuals and communities to practice their faith in a manner consistent with their beliefs and traditions, without fear of legal repercussions. The regulation of the religious cannabis use will ensure that these practices are conducted safely and respectfully. Madam President, we who support this legislation must give substance to history. I suppose there are times we who serve in this place, such as this, feel very incumbent in exhausting nuances on legislation. This is out of concern that legislation may be lost on certain parts of the citizenry. Madam President, I submit, and of course it is my humble Bahamian opinion, that the country has been waiting on this legislature, to do this for a very long time, and that is why the Davis-led government deserves commendation for halting at a long last and kicking the can down the street syndrome. We have a refreshing and vibrant cannabis legislation and the solid framework for a well-regulated industry. For most of the 20th century and for a small part of the 21st century, cannabis has been regarded as a public menace, a dangerous addictive drug, void of any medicinal talents, and the drug of lazy blacks and Latinos in the United States of America and other places. The Bahamian people who have been fed the cannabis story down through the ages are deserving of an explanation and clarity on this new position, which seemed to have unanimous support in the Parliament. Why is this drug, which has ruined the lives of so many people who have used small amounts for whatever purposes, with criminal record, jail time, and fines? These are the questions that people are asking me as I traverse. My friends, why is the drug, Madam President, which figured so prominently in the Commission of Inquiry report of 1985, now to be sanitized by this legislation here before us today? Why is this plan now to be grown in hectares of land in the Bahamas and exported and used locally for medicinal and research experiments? The people want to know why this plan is now to be treasured and valued. Once upon a time, the discovery of such marijuana fields saw them razed to the ground by fire, by the order of the courts. The people want to know, how do we as a nation reconcile the absurdity of thousands of Bahamians whose lives were upended or convictions on small quantities of small usage of cannabis and the police records which scarred them. The people want to know why a country like the Bahamas, with a University of the Bahamas, a country with a highly intelligent citizenry, with distinguished parliamentary with a distinguished parliamentary democracy, why is it that we come in behind smaller island states in the region in a move to this bill here today? Madam President, these concerns are of people which I just listed are concerns they have shared with me for more than a decade, and particularly over the last 6 years when debate began on liberating cannabis here in the country. Madam President, the answers the people are entitled to get are even more urgently necessary when you consider how people, for a large part, for decades, have been pushing for some ray of hope in lawful use of cannabis to treat many illnesses. Let's look at how the decriminalization of cannabis has taken place in other countries and those which have similar histories as ours. Madam President, anthropologists and historians will no doubt prescribe to the Bahamian people a peculiar knowledge and fascination and involvement with traditional medicine, or what they call bush medicine. A steady stream of West Indies immigrants to the Bahamas from countries like Jamaica and Haiti and Barbados, where cannabis was also illegal, but whose properties for healing were well known, stirred the underground movement, Madam President, here, where we know from stories handed down, cannabis, as they call it, was secretly used to relieve excruciating pain and remedy other illnesses. Yet, the Western world wrestled with a subjective discrimination of cannabis, which is linked to the arrival, some would say, of Mexican immigrants into the United States. These Mexicans brought their cannabis plants, which they use medicinally and for recreational use. We all know how prejudice starts and expands. Just misunderstand or confuse or be in a rage over someone else's existence or their rights to exist, and we have a recipe for disaster. My parents tell me that as children, they saw Western or cowboy movies, and Mexicans were either all drunk or about to sit down at a bar. Drunkards, they would say. So it did not take any amount of time for the new subjection, drug addicts, would be added. Then, in 1936, the film Reefer Madness was introduced, which demonized cannabis as an addictive drug that caused mental disorder and violence. In 1970, the U.S. introduced the Controlled Substances Act, which lists cannabis as having no accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. Black exploitation movies of the 1970s helped to grease the wheels on this misinformation and cannabis, while its recreational use increased and the illegal narcotic trafficking industry was netting billions. We saw no move to return cannabis to its ancient rightful place at our hospitals, clinics, and research laboratories. Here in the Bahamas, in the 1970s, the Dangerous Drug Act spoke to marijuana or cannabis, and the slippery slope was being dredged for the next 53 years. We spent millions of dollars protecting our borders from illegal narcotics, and hundreds of Bahamians lost their lives in the nefarious trades. All the while, everyone had a basic idea that this drug had medicinal qualities. Madam President, we must hold the truths in front of us and accept the reality of our situations and how lives are lived and how communities breathe. It is when we are best able to do this kind of evaluation, we as legislators are better able to meet the legislative needs and requirements of a society in real time. Through the periods of the 1970s, the attack on the integrity of cannabis and medicinal usefulness remained in high gear. This was, of course, accelerated with the fascination of the newspaper and radio and television news to amplify persons charged as little as a fingertail tip of cannabis before the courts. Prime time on the electronic media and prominent space in print. The religious community is always fired up to engage in such discourse. One day, we will have to ask ourselves, as the nation grows and develops, how much time should we put into gathering consensus, move forward on legislation, and should any specific grouping whose view or position are contrary to the majority of the electorate should be the brakes which slows legislative progress, Madam President? Marijuana or cannabis was primarily viewed in the country as a very hallucinogenic drug, and it was said to bring out the worst in the youth and encouraged a life of crime, laziness, and indulgence. Hence, in the 1970s, the term sitting on the blocks, smoking dope, became the curse and perception of the many who simply did not understand or respect the rights and privileges of younger people to gather and vent and discuss their circumstances among themselves. Records from the court in the 1970s indicate that juries were prejudiced against the defendants on any charge if the defendant was said by the police to be high at the time of their arrest. Too high was to be guilty. That's what it was back then. Madam President, this is not a misadventure of which the Bahamas holds any exclusivity. The rest of the Western world was behaving towards marijuana or cannabis, in some instances in more draconian fashion than we were. There were those stories out of Cuba about the conditions of the detention in Cuba of Bahamians suspected of cannabis possession or more nefarious crimes. Yet, scientists were continuing their development and research on cannabis despite its leery positioning as a dangerous substance. Madam President, scientists knew from their experiment and from history the value of cannabis, the value that cannabis brought through the medical field, and the holy success associated with its use. And nations were beginning to question the fairness of attaching criminal records and dangerous drug convictions to persons found with small amounts of cannabis. Madam President, Jamaica decriminalized certain amounts of cannabis and launched its medicinal cannabis usage and research in February of 2015. The state of Florida, the United States, decriminalized marijuana use and possession in certain small amounts in 2016. Way down in the land down under in Australia, decriminalized in 2016. Madam President, I will share some information on what the University of Sydney, Australia, in a well-respected report found out about cannabis and its properties and usage spanning an age before our time. Canada decriminalized cannabis in 2018. Antigua and Barbuda decriminalized cannabis in 2018. This is a very small Caribbean country compared to the Bahamas. The Bahamas is catching up, Madam President, in 2024. I submit that if the Progressive Liberal Party government, led by the Honorable Philip Brave Davis, was not in office today, this cannabis legislation would still be sitting on the FNM's desk, gathering dust, as they vacillated as they did for almost 5 years and could not make a decision to go the whole 9 yards. Madam President, well, once again, the party of the majority, the party of the 18-year-old vote, the party of independence, the party of the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, the party of the College of the Bahamas, now University of the Bahamas, the Party of National Insurance. It works for you when you can't, has gone to the head of the class as the social change and national innovator of change and progress in bringing this cannabis legislation here today. Madam President, I wanted to pass over those volatile and highly vocal social and cultural wars in this country on cannabis and how the stigma was so entrenched in the Bahamian psyche. The arrival of the Rastafarian movement, which emerged in Jamaica to the Bahamas, helped to fuel the stigma, Madam President. Here was something which defied all of our Judeo-Christian concepts, and it was African and was calling an African the Most High. I am told that so many persons older than my parents almost lost their minds. The Rastafarians with their children and grandchildren. They moved into camps in Angliston. Their daily prayer, rituals, and chants, and the procession and parade of robed men and women with turbans and locks was viewed with much skepticism. When the records shop in Nassau began importing reggae music, that would be another cultural shocker. In 1979, the United Nations officially celebrated the International Year of the Child, and then very young Jamaican reggae singer Bob Marley and the Wailers were contracted by the UN to be the official artists in the region for the celebration, marking the Year of the Child. The government of the day appointed an International Year of the Child Committee, headed by the late Miss Beryl Hannah and the distinguished Justice Ruby Nordage as co-chairs. Madam President, my research shows that these two women were responsible for the super concert in Nassau in July of 1979, where Bob Marley would appear at the Sports Center. Huge sections of the religious community just about lost their minds. Mrs. Hannah and Nordage were vilified in newspapers. The government was accused of introducing, sanctioning Bob Marley and the marijuana culture to the nation. My parents tell me it was the largest concert ever of its kind at the time. Thousands of white and black Bahamians came out as a show of force for our multiculturalism, and more importantly, to demonstrate that they, by their presence, could speak for themselves, and no entity or sect had a right to speak for them or to compartmentalize them, Madam President. Madam President, the Cannabis Bill 2024 is the opening of a new corridor of modernization and international relevance, social and scientific cognizance in our developing nation. I applaud the Progressive Labour Party government, led by Philip Brave Davis, for remaining steadfast and doing the heavy lifting and true to the promise made in the general election manifesto, our blueprint for change in 2021, which is now before us in bill form and will hopefully be passed into law, Madam President. Madam President, the new bill used the scientific name cannabis, but let's get Bahamian and recognize that our people know it as marijuana. That is the name attached to the plant, and the plant is the source from which all of the medicinal derivatives of which this bill is seeking to grant access here in the Bahamas is all about. And let's face it, Madam President, let's face it, Bahamians associated with the term marijuana with anything prejudicial, but we must respect international protocols. Moreover, out of our slavery past, we are more than aware of the prejudices of colonialism and the harmful characteristics, laws, and traits it left in its trail. Madam President, I mentioned a study from the University of Sydney, and as I began to wrap up, I just wanted to at this time just share a bit of that study and what the university disclosed. The following, the following facts about cannabis. It was first mentioned in early as 2800 BC, where it was listed in documented cases by Chinese Emperor Shen Nong in his Pharmacopoeia. Shen Nong is regarded as the father of Chinese medicine. Hindu legend holds that Shiva, the supreme deity of many sects, was given the title the Lord of Bahang because cannabis was his favorite food. In 1841, William Brooke introduced cannabis to the Western medicine after living in India. He wrote of the many medicinal uses of cannabis and how it stopped convulsion in a child. In 1898, Dunstan and Henry isolated cannabinoid or CBN. Then in 1936, the film Reefer Madness was introduced, which demonized cannabis as an addictive drug. Say again? That caused mental disorder and violence. In 1940, Adams and Toad isolated cannabinoid CBD from the plant. In 1964, it was the THC was isolated from the cannabis plant. In the 1970s, the U.S. introduced the Controlled Substance Act that lists cannabis as having no accepted medical use and with a high potential for abuse. In 1988, Howlett discovered CB1 receptors in a rat's brain. In 2012, CBD was shown to alleviate schizophrenia symptoms in patients comparable to a conventional antipsychotic drug. As early as 1999, endocannabinoids were discovered to activate TRPV1 receptors. In 2017, CBD demonstrated it could reduce seizures in childhood epilepsy in a placebo-controlled trials. Madam President, 100 years from today, persons may wonder why is it that today we must give these histories an explanation to the Bahamian people when the facts which I have mentioned were always out there. The facts of the matter is the damage to the medical integrity of cannabis has been so forceful and driven that the fullest explanation is required and deserved. Madam President, we have an opportunity to be in this cannabis medicinal industry, which has an international tourism market value of billions of dollars. We have the climate and the soil to raise the highest Bahamian grade of cannabis for export for these purposes and use at home. We must remember that research in this field costs, in many instances, millions of dollars before research gives the green light to a finding. Research can be an unending tunnel of investment monies before the first product to make a return on a dollar happens, sometimes many years down the road, as the research has to be funded and financed. The legislation correctly gives the incentives to non-Bahamians and Bahamians who may have the interest and the association and the access to the funding to do such research in the Bahamas. Madam President, there are concerns from our citizens in the Rastafarian community, and we must pause and listen to those concerns. Madam President, the time is always right to do the right thing. We must learn from this exercise, however, that we must keep an open mind and we must do the research and study rather than rush to judgment or prejudices whose genesis is from ideas and cultures absolutely foreign to the Bahamian ideal. We must also resist the urge to follow, but we must lead. Madam President, as we advance these reforms, it is critical to address the impact on our society. The rehabilitation of the offenders, expunge of records, the Indian Offences Order 2024 allows individuals previously convicted for processing small amounts of cannabis to apply for expungement of their records. This reflects our commitment to rectifying past injustices while implementing a responsible regulatory framework. Decriminalization will reduce the burden on our criminal justice system, allowing law enforcement to focus on more serious crimes. It will also prevent individuals from having their lives irreversibly impacted by criminal records for minor non-violent offenses. This bill proposes to expunge the records of those previously convicted for small amounts of cannabis possession. It is essential to stress that decriminalization does not mean full legalization. While possession of small amounts of cannabis has been decriminalized, it remains unlawful, with fines of $250 for minor infractions. This approach reflects our commitment to a regulated framework that balances reform with responsibility. Madam President, the legalization and regulation of cannabis presents substantial economic opportunities for the Bahamas. The global cannabis industry is rapidly growing, from projections estimating to be worth billions of dollars in the coming years. The cultivation of cannabis can revitalize our agricultural sector, providing farmers with new crops and markets. The development of the legal cannabis industry will also foster entrepreneurship and innovation as businesses explore diverse products and services related to cannabis. Additionally, tourism can benefit from the appeal of a destination that offers regulated and legal medicinal experiences. Madam President, the PLP's blueprint for change emphasizes creating economic opportunities for all Bahamians within the cannabis industry. Madam President, legalizing cannabis requires a delicate balance between individual freedoms and public safety. The Cannabis Bill 2024 seeks to protect the rights of individuals to make informed choices about their health and lifestyle while ensuring that cannabis use does not pose a risk to others. This balance is achieved through strict regulations on the scale, distribution, and consumption of cannabis, including age restrictions and limit on advertising and marketing. Public safety measures will include stringent controls on driving under the influence of cannabis, with clear guidelines and penalties to deter impaired driving. By establishing a legal and regulated market, we can also better control the potency and quality of cannabis products, reducing the risk associated with unregulated and potentially harmful substances. It is important to note, to protect young people, cannabis products cannot be marketed in a way that suggests confectionery or dessert flavors. Edible cannabis products cannot be advertised as fulfilling dietary or physical needs and must be promoted in areas frequent by must not be promoted in areas frequent by minors. Madam President, it is natural for there to be concerns and misconceptions surrounding the legalization of cannabis. Some may fear an increase in substance abuse, impaired driving, or negative impact on youth. However, evidence from jurisdictions that have already legalized cannabis indicates that these concerns can be effectively managed through appropriate regulation and public education. For instance, studies show that cannabis legalization does not lead to significant increase in youth usage. In fact, regulated markets often include robust measures to prevent access by minors. Additionally, public health campaigns and strict enforcement of impaired driving laws can mitigate the risk associated with cannabis use. Madam President, the experience of other jurisdictions that have legalized cannabis provide valuable lessons for the Bahamas. Countries like Canada and states such as Colorado and California have demonstrated that it is possible to implement a legal cannabis framework that promotes public health and safety and economic growth. Their success and challenges offers insight into best practices and potential pitfalls to avoid. Madam President, in conclusion, I would like to encourage all senators to support this legislation. This represents a balanced approach to cannabis legislation. It is a progressive and transformative step forward for the Bahamas. It addresses long-standing social injustices, offers new avenues for medical treatment, respect cultural and religious practices, and opens the door to significant economic opportunities. It integrates thoughtful safeguard regulatory standards and measures to protect public health and safety. By legalizing and regulating cannabis, we can build a more just, healthy, and prosperous society. Madam President, there is a classical photo of Prime Minister Pinling on the morning of the 10th of July, 1973, as the Union Jack is about to be lowered at Clifford Park, and our new national flag to climb the flagpole. The caption of the photograph and the words of the writer describe how the British Royal Governor is taking his slow walk to the pole, while Mr. Pinling is yards ahead, walking briskly and determined to get to this last act, fading colonialism done. We must take Mr. Pinling's example. It may be a new road we are about to trod, but we must step boldly and be brave as we continue to a new frontier. I urge all senators to support the Cannabis Bill 2024, not only for its immediate benefits, but for the lasting legacy it will create for future generations. Madam President, I support this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Pickstock, for your contribution. As many, the chair recognizes Senator the Honorable Ruben Raming.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam President. Now, Madam President, historically, the Senate has been a place of elder statesmen, and I don't say that to be rhetorical to any age, but a place where they would have persons who would bring perspective or even a different view to legislations that are being presented. And the Senate in itself has the privilege and ability from that position of wisdom, which it would have possessed historically, to even send a bill back to the lower house for revision. This bill in and of itself, to me, is a very, very good attempt. I think no one in here, no right-thinking person in here would assume that this bill or any other bill is anything more superior than a net. It will have holes. but it's the best intent to capture as best as possible the desired intent. I think seldom, if any, legislation could be called anything but a net, because the level of perfection has eluded us worldwide from time immemorial. Many times the devil and the danger, whether intended or otherwise, is in the details. There's a saying on Sesame Street, you know, you guys remember Sesame Street? They said that's about the size where you put your eyes. That's about the size of it. So the big becomes a little when you step back a bit, because that's about the size of it. Many times you will find, even in draftsmanship, that it's always good to have somebody with fresh eyes to look over what is you're doing, because your mind can become so fixated on the intent that it could actually miss things that are very, very important. We've seen it even in this place and other places where sometimes a simple word was misplaced. And we know in law that could change everything. And bills have been sent back for those adjustments. Seeing that the Minister of Health led off this debate in the lower house, I will lead this out using the exact same scripture text that he used. When he started it, he quoted from Revelation chapter 2, and he used chapter 22 and 2. The Minister of Health did when he started off this debate. And like most things, people have perspective, but here's the full context of that. Revelation chapter 22 starts off, says, and he showed me a pure river of water, of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and the Lamb of God. And this is what the minister quoted, verse 2. And in the midst of the street of it, and on either side of the river, was there a tree of life, which bore 12 manner of fruits, and yielded her fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nation. That's why he said it, you know. Let me finish with the other one. And there shall be no more curse, but the throne of God, and of the Lamb shall be in it, and the servant shall serve him. And it says, and they shall see his face, and his name shall be in their forehead. And the final one says, and there shall be no night there, and they need no candle, neither light from the sun, for the Lord giveth them light, and they shall shine on. The thing about it is, we need to use things in context. When it says the leaves are for the healing in the nation, that was a specific time and a specific place. And unless the other conditions surrounding that is met, where you find any tree that brings 12 forms of fruit, and I'm an agriculturalist, and one of my projects is to produce a single mango tree that bears at least 7 kinds of mangoes. And I've done it before, but I want to do one for my yard. But this doesn't even speak to that. Why am I saying this? Not only that it's out of context, I want us to understand too, even when we go down things historically, as Senator Pistock did, we got to realize what was then ain't what we got now. And this very bill proves that point over and over again. We're talking about cultivating cannabis, and in the cultivation, being able to vary it by strains, potency, chemical constituency, and manipulating it. Even when the Bible speaks about bread and how good bread ain't the same now, ma'am. The wheat that we use is so bleached out. The flour that we use is so bleached out. The wheat is hybridized. In many instances, got animal or insect DNA in it. We know that things ain't the way. Water ain't what it was back then. Most of our healthcare issues is from the food that we eat that are so processed now that it ain't really food. The fruits we get here are cut at such a young age just so they can make the transshipment journey that by the time it reaches, you get young fruit force ripened. What I'm simply saying is that we need to be careful because things aren't always what they are. And so when we look at things, obviously it has a standpoint that represents the full purity and potency of a thing. This bill is important. And sadly, this bill is and the issue of cannabis is a whirlwind that we simply have to face. And this bill, even though doing what I think it is fair to say, the vast majority of Bahamian people in part support, especially medicinal use. It still raises a lot of questions. And I hope we're respectful enough to hear the questions and just to appreciate them so that it add perspective maybe for further deliberation even later on.
I think it's perfect.
I already said that, sir.
Yeah, we're open to making amendments.
Please proceed, Senator.
Thank you, Madam President. Because I fully want us to appreciate that legislatively the time has come. This bill addresses a number of things which I think is well written. I think the efforts by the government to actually control every aspect of the marijuana from its legal point of view, I think that is commendable. I think it's going to be a little hard to even find more diligent effort to manage it in terms of that level of cannabis or weed that is naturally now being allowed in for the function of medicinal use. No, I'll be grateful. I just want to talk. It's not left or right for me. I just really want to just talk. All right? And I commend that effort.
Yes.
A couple of points I want to raise. First of all, when we look at this, we're getting people so hyped up on the market value and the monies that could be made in it, that in focusing so much so on that, it causes us many times to run with our heads in the sky and not looking at where our feet may be trotting, and in some instances not accurately at where we're going.
We have a tighten at the wheel. Tighten.
The thing is, madam, currently right now, there's about 5,000 people in the Bahamas who would fit at this time, this category, for medicinal cannabis to be a consideration in their health regime.
What is the amount of tourists?
Yeah, it was sent around. It was sent around. It was sent around. Some quoted from your source. If you object to it, stand. It's not a big deal for me. The thing about it is, when we look at the size of our archipelago, when we look at the volume of people in that, the Bahamas in and of itself as a market has limitations, but the Bahamas in producing a quality product for the international market is very, very positive. We have, right now though, there are many who are actually thinking in terms of this thing. that we're gonna soon and swiftly be that powerhouse that is gonna take some of that international shares or market shares from the U.S. and from Canada. Well, Jamaica has been doing it much longer than us, and they had not begun to have that amount of impact, despite their culture being more steeped into the sacramental use of the drug. But I just want us to be cautioned that if a country with 2+ million have to go through that growing pain, even us will have to go through. That our market strain, our market forces will determine a lot of things. And notwithstanding the fact that the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas has taken extreme lengths in legislation to create many different facets of opportunities within the cannabis industry. Yes. It is still a realistic thing to consider that market forces in itself initially is going to constrain a lot of persons. And most likely you're going to still find that the few select individuals by capability and valuation will have a jump on the market and the market forces. It doesn't change the fact that those who have the endurance to cultivate their product can still tap into the international market forces. But it's not going to be, maybe in the medium term, the panacea that persons have been seeking in this regard. There are some matters that arises out of this, Madam President, that has caused some concern in my mind. One of them, when it comes down to the religious use of cannabis and the possible doors that will be opened by it. And again, I basically confess that the government in this instance is still constrained. Because it's my understanding that even in the process of this going to court, and if I take what the Attorney General said in his opening and extrapolate it to us, it is highly likely that resisting that is going to stand up to judicial scrutiny in the end. Now, some may ask then, if that's the case, don't be the hand that subscribe it, let the courts do it. Because courts in the country aren't elected. They're appointed and created as a separate part of government for a shared independence, rather than the government doing it themselves and being the one to legislate a sacrament. Those are the opinion of persons that are out there. But herein lies some of the problems that we must consider in this regard. Because when it comes to religious freedom, there cannot actually be discrimination. Religion freedom from the hands of the government and under the law must allow accessibility across the board in terms of the expression of one's religious acumen. And so even in this law, when we see that in its writing, especially in 49 of this bill, section 49, when it speaks about religious use, it exclusively gave the benefit of the use of the cannabis to just simply the Rastafarian faith. As the law, which we must understand, is in a religious setting, they have right to choose how they want to worship their God. Notwithstanding we calling ourselves a Christian nation and we made the commitment to abide by Christian values. Yet we are not an oppressive country where we seek to sideline any religion. So now we see here, despite, I believe, what is the sincere attempt, especially because there had been mainly one religious denomination / faith driving for this form of sacrament. In the writing thereof, it should have been basically under just pure religion. Then let's also consider this, now that we have taken a psychoactive drug and endorsed it as a sacrament, what is there to stop other religious entity or persons who form a religious entity now to determine that for their sacrament they are in need of other psychotropic drugs, such as some who use magic mushrooms and other kind of drugs, for now being able to challenge this very same thing under their same guise of religion. And then it seems, as presented, that this would have satisfied the Rastafarian community, but obviously from statements made by the representatives of segments of the community, because I only saw one leadership name, it would have been demonstrated. I thought you was being prophetic of what I said. I simply said it cannot be representative of all. It came from the Rastafarian community, but I cannot say it's representative of all because there was only one name attached to what I'm about to say. You follow me? All right. In this case, one of the persons in a reported article write clearly, and I think I'll just quote him on this: members of the Rastafarian community are voicing their objection to the cannabis bill, which was passed in the House of Assembly this week, so just passed. So the bill recognizes cannabis as a holy sacrament for the Rastafarian faith and outlines access to cannabis for religious use. Executive board members of the House of Rastafari, and that's Prophet Jah McKinney Bow, that's why I said an individual. If they legislated the way that does not work for the Rastafarian community, we will not change our stance to go along with the law. We will continue to go the way of our faith, and we will see the government back in the Supreme Court, where we already had them. So we're not scared to take the government to court over this. And if I could look through a crystal ball, that's all we see happening. According to Bo, the House of Rastafari does not agree with the use of cannabis being contained in the tabernacle or place of worship, He said the body is the temple. He said the body is the temple. And I'll stop right there. So basically he's saying wherever the individual is, he is the temple, so he should be allowed to smoke, which this bill rightfully, especially because the psychotropic effect of the drug still hasn't changed despite it being legalized for medical use. It still must be handled responsibility, and it's gone through painful efforts to accommodate in proper restricted environments, your temple, even your homes, which is a little risky, but that's an over-generous extension, so you could do it at your home because all the worship in the same place. But now we see the level of defiance. And the fear here, because I'm going someplace with this, is that I view this as an effort of containing Pandora. But you remember that world when I spoke about that was coming down the way and had to be faced by the government? It's still going to come. And I'm going to show you some of the things that make me think and believe why. And then, not only to the Rastafarians, I mean, I got to say this to the people of my faith, Christian people, man. We got over 1,000 churches in this country, just in the country, and just in this little Nassau, little New Providence. And if you just average 50 people in the church who dedicated and faithful to their word, let's call all of them just 50. That's 50,000 people. public opinion change public policy. I saw the combined House of Rastafari in the Bahamas don't have those volumes. This is a democratic place. So we got to learn a lesson from some of these people. Some of these Bahamian citizens who are of other faiths. If you believe your faith so strong, then don't just sit down there and say, Pastor, go there by yourself. Stand up for your faith. So Lyndon say, could be put in the same position. If you aren't willing to fight for it, you don't deserve it. Faith without works is dead. You can go behind your pew and pray all you want. You can go send the Christian Council after people. But government smart, you know. They know them unions who really ain't got no support. But they have legal status. People got to be able to see you backing your leaders. And then they watch you when you criticize your own leaders, when you're fighting, then when your leaders go before any government. All there is you know them pot cake with the ain't bite. So the power of the church is being diluted. This country was built, majority rule was built from the pulpits of this church. So Lyndon had the insight to follow that momentum and it drove him through. Those Baptist preachers and things back in those days, it moved the nation. Now where are we? I don't condemn the Rastas. It's their rights. And I will stand for the right of anyone whom even if I disagree with them. If it's your right, it is your right. Because if you could do it to the Rastafarian and hinder their religious freedom, what do you think the Catholic or Baptist or Anglican or Seventh-day, you think they safe? This is how we need to look at life, you know. So if the door can be open for an illicit drug to be used for sacrament, it's not a right or wrong thing. The door is open for the same expression in other areas as relate to religion. Even if the door is closed legislatively, constitutionally, I'm not a lawyer, but any reasonable lawyer will know that genie is out of the box. It's just a matter who's willing to push it. And then we have some other concerns that will despite, may challenge the government's best effort to ensure that this drug is properly used, because cannabis is still illegal. It's legal when it's done according to law. All right? And so here it is, for the purposes of religious use, you don't use medical marijuana. But marijuana has a higher level of controls. So then that means if you're going to legalize it for religious use, then the regular ganja must have a place to be cultivated. Though controls are in it, it's still the medical ganja. And the medical cannabis is the same as the weed on the street in this regard. The natural response of the human body is to build tolerance. So over a period of time, to get the same effect, you gotta up the dose. So if you need a certain level 1 to reach nirvana or whatever spiritual plane you need to commune with your God, your own natural body will fight against that over time, and you'll realize that the same thing ain't getting you to the same place. Ain't getting you to the same place. It's a scientific fact. It's a scientific fact of antibiotics, it's a scientific fact of anything. It's a scientific fact of drinking, which they've been doing it for years. And you get to the point of it's going to get to that level. So there will still be on, and then we know the illegal market is still going to be there. So let me just summarize. It's been a fight. The legal, I don't personally recommendation. If you had listened to what I'm saying, I'm explaining, not to you, you know, to the people, the gamut of this. I'm not even trying to impress or get your support. That don't matter to me. I'm here to speak the truth. That's it. That's it. No, the master can't disagree with me because the fact is the body builds up tolerance. That's a
It's for their
That's-
religious purposes.
listen. I ain't saying nothing about the religion. I'm saying the fact is that if the drug is used to help you get to a state of religious plane, this is not a for or against, you know. It's a statement of fact. To get to that level, whether medically or psychotropically, for whatever helps you, obviously, it increases. That's a fundamental fact. That's undeniable. You know, when I went off to college, you know, and I was studying a series of things, and one was also pastoral studies, and I took a whole different course. Course means direction. Because I believe a person who wants to lead people, and it's not diminishing the Bible, you know. All you can do is preach and you think you get it good. But how you can address people in life when you don't want to have an understanding of law and politics and this and socioeconomic stuff and economy, so you could help guide your people. You know, that's what Jesus did. All the Bible give you all kind of advice, flora, fauna, civic, culture, history. You got to be sufficiently well versed. And one of the things I deliberately took was addictive studies. To understand these things and how people go through these things, including even going to places when persons go through these things and have to go through withdrawals and all the other different things. Been there. I don't talk about myself, but this is not off the cuff, off the head kind of thing. And also ministers and people and families have to learn to deal with these things when they come up. I know of a specific case where twins, both of them experimented with marijuana. One ended up in Sunderland. But my point isn't, again, left or right, because listen, I'm a practical man. This can pass. Both parties support the bill. I'm speaking simple truth. No fanfare, no applause, not even your opinion. I'm going to speak my truth here today. And to hope it informs or enlightens persons. And then there is a concern, and you know, monitoring is going to be very, very heavy, especially as related to that, because of the privilege of using it in different places, and to make sure that abuse is not obtained. I appreciate the efforts that I see in the legislation to try to defend minors against it. And why I would disagree with the Rastafarians on this note clearly, openly, because the desire to, and I can appreciate your body is the temple of the Lord, we believe that too. But what your temples should not do, and this is an interesting thing about religious freedom, I can't force you to believe what I want to believe. I can't force you to take my sacrament. And unlike the bread and the wine, if I sitting in the car and you smoking your sacrament, you're forcing me to take it. That's why I support the government's view of restraining public use. And I think it's a generous overreach to say homes and everything else. That is good. But you can't force that. I ain't saying the Rastafarian can't go on the streets and preach, because what go in your head, there's a filter that can filter all that out. What go in your body, where's the filter? So I would hope that children in the homes are properly protected, as we see the intent of the law is trying to do, but we know the risk is very, very high. So we cannot support that being, well, I see no reason why support that being done openly. And then when we look at this, we look at matters relating to even the penalties. So before I get to that, let me simply recap. The potential for marijuana is great. Fabric, clothes, even building materials. You see what I'm saying? It is great. We are literally in the development segment, a developing nation. We first class in tourism, you know, but industry, we just starting to grow. That's going to take a lot. I appreciate the restraints that is trying to make sure it's dehumanized. But I know the reality of my Bahama land, that those people who get all that money right now are going to jump shot the market. Because there's two ways to beat you. The government could give you all the opportunity you can. You can't blame the government. But then market forces play the real game. They could beat you out to the market to so much point, to the point, whereas it ain't even advantageous if you even try. Or you drop out. And when you see the number of people losing because the certain class of boys, you know, we got a bunch of boys in the country, grouping that called boys, are able to control the market legally and squeeze you out or even block you out before you begin, or even then you see when there's end up being restrictions on certain things, should that come, there's not much in here at all, buy you out. And then at the end of the day, we end up seeing one block still have control again. That's the nature of our society. You can't stand here and deny it, all right, in that regard. And then the religious freedom aspect, we must be prepared for the clear and present danger of others in our community now riding the wave of that right to be able to not only marijuana, but other psychotropic drugs and call it guys under their religious practices. And also when you do something as a religious practice, it should not be labeled by just one simple entity. Because you're restricting others, and it's their choice whether they want to use it or not. And then we come down to an interesting thing that I do have problem with. Do I see, and I could appreciate the intent with the penalties as it relate to cannabis. And it is reasonable because we know cannabis is still illegal, non-medical regulated or religious cannabis is illegal. All right? Before I get there, let me talk about the issue of expungement. I full-heartedly believe in expungement, you know. I have a problem with the language we throwing out with it. We do something to them. See, you got to realize with the law, you know, when you do one, it applies across the board. The law of the Commonwealth of Bahamas had something say you don't deal with weed. You got caught with weed. Small or large, you broke the law. The problem is in this way. That is not an apology. Like we did that to them. No, you did that to yourself. Now, I believe in any instances that when a man has proven himself, you know, that happened 5 years ago, that happened whatever else ago, and he's been of good standing or whatever else, man, you can't hold him back. You catch what I'm saying? It's not a problem with the expungement, it's a problem with the language, because if the language keep going down the road, we are now telling people, you know what, we're sorry for letting the law hurt you. When you had a choice not to do it like everybody else. That's all I'm simply saying. The lessons in discipline is when the punishment is had and the grace is given, that brings appreciation. Because now we're going to get to a point where we are right now, where you're going to have persons with 1 ounce of weed whose punishment will be a ticket. So they pay a ticket. And we need to consider, when we weigh out the cost-benefit analysis of the odds of one individual getting catch with 1 ounce of weed, right? The grass, from a business perspective on the streets, what's the cost-benefit of the dude who may get a chance of getting catch with some weed, 1 ounce of weed, once every so often? Have you ever considered that this in itself now create another so-called quasi-legal business? Whereas, you know, because if I can go into business where I can make $1,000 a week and the fine is $200 a week.
Not for him. Not for him.
You know?
Not for him though.
Huh?
Because the fellow
No. No, there are different levels. No, they're different. The thing about it is, listen to me. Remember, listen to me. Listen, I am saying a business, but you weren't listening yet. Let me finish it, then you'll understand. It's not misleading because you're not listening. All right? Let me explain to you why it is a business. And it will end up being that despite what I keep saying, the good intent of the bill. All right? Let me show you something. If whoever thinks that on them. So if you get catch with this, right? You pay fine, right? Right? Good, he paid a fine. It's not what I just said. So if I could sell $1,000 worth of these, right? And I get catch one, mind you, the what you call distribution only applies when you get caught and how you handle it. It is never called distribution if I only have 1 ounce of it. Now you understand what I'm saying? It doesn't matter what your intent is. I only have 1 ounce. And under the law, 1 ounce is not distribution. What you do, all right, 1 ounce is the penalty for 1 ounce if you're caught with it. The penalty if for 1 ounce, because I know that the act still apply because cannabis is still illegal. But the loophole is with 1 ounce, you pay the fine. Isn't that it?
Yeah. I thought they could confiscate your badge too.
Whatever they want to do. Whatever. No. I'm not talking with somebody who has this legally. We talk with persons who have 1 ounce of it. Let me show you something. Yeah, you probably deal with it. Right? Somebody even who has someone who even has a license as it relates to law. And with the medical cannabis, they're only allowed to carry up to 30-day supply. Let me know if I'm wrong. I'm not here to be wrong. A 30-day supply, and that's reasonable because that's just like medication. You get 30-day supply of any particular medication and so on and so forth. What we face here with is this. We're going to have young people who perceive things differently. How many of y'all would disagree that when the cannabis thing first came out, even the thought of it, and probably even still now, despite how it's being stressed in medical, how many of y'all would disagree that there's some of them out there done thinking, boy, I can grow weed? I'm not bleeding the government for it, you know, but we got to know the nature and the thinking of our people. Some of them will read the law, and you know what their thinking is going to be? Oh, you know, I'm going to go ahead and get this loophole. I'm trying to bring to you the street level understanding of this, because many times we pass laws in here, and many times people say, it's so above my head, I ain't get it, and still end up in jail because they didn't consult or didn't get whatever else around it. So now you're going to have the fellas on the street. You know why I brought this here? Because I sit there and I talk with a couple of them, you know, and I said, let me go to this place and show them what some people on the street is thinking and watch their reaction. You jump to your head game instead of dealing with your people according to knowledge. Ma'am, there are young people there right now. Right now, and I had did some other inquiries because some people know me, who are literally thinking now that, boy, you know what this means? I can carry this weed and ain't nothing gonna happen. Mind, they even ain't here the $200. Mind, they still even in here that the other criminal enforcement acts that are stated in here and referenced in here still are enacted. They are hearing this. So one saying, boy, oh, you know, with that 1 ounce of weed, you know what I could do with that? The position is I'm stating views. The position, oh, thank you. The position is I am stating views that exist out there. And if you're a person of the ground, you tell me you don't exist? All right, and so what I'm saying, like I said, what I am saying is if we appreciate it, we can anticipate it. But if you, please sir, I'm speaking. But if you dismiss these, then the very same people we are trying to help, even with expungement and everything else, is going to be driven because there's going to be a lot of people out there who get this sort of misunderstanding. How many people as lawyers, and you're a lawyer, end up before the court simply because they're ignorance? That's why they say ignorance is no defense. But they are. So what do we do as legislators? The law says that for law to be enacted, we need to gazette it as well, right? That's a part of the whole process. You know what that means? Public information. I'm just saying in our deliberation and dissemination of this, We need to make sure, speak to it also on a grassroots level. Most of the talk has been towards the business owner, the people who seeing opportunity, seeing this. But the fellow who on the side of the road who we going looking for votes for, they're the same ones who thinking on a different level. I know, because when I talk to them, they say, man, boy, Dread, I see that like that. I say, you need to see it like that. Because if you don't see it like that, you're going to run around thinking you can go ahead, and this is probably about 56 beanies right in here, and this even ain't an ounce in weight. This ain't an ounce in weight. And you're going to run around, and you're going to end up with something. Then some of them thinking, oh, man, each time I can pay $125, $250, but small things, pay. By the time I sell this much weed, you know what I can make? I say, brother, you're crazy, you know. I say, you're dumb. That's those who I can talk to on that level. I say, you need to consider yourself. You don't want to then, when you get judged, suddenly become an expert on something because you don't want to go and find out exactly what it takes. I'm saying, help us save some of these people. Break it down more colloquially and be very diligent about it. Because there's even saying now that there's some little fellas in school thinking, nah, I could roll these up like this. This ain't an ounce, you know. This is less than half ounce right there. And I could do my little thing. Some of them even came to me many times, say, boy, this mean I can grow some in my backyard. I say, you grow some in your backyard, you're going to end up in jail. All I'm giving you is perspectives. It's a perspective and a clear reality that will happen. And the very same people we're trying to save so that they can have business, they can travel, they can get this off their record and other different kind of things. We're not only trying to save them, we want to prevent them from doing it. Because this is what some of them seeing from the exemption. They're not saying that the person who, even if you carry medical marijuana, you only supposed to have a certain amount on you. You catch what I'm saying? Even with medical marijuana, you only supposed to have a certain amount on you. They thinking marijuana. And if you have a certain amount on you, even in religious use, that's a special section just for that. That's why I say this is diligent. There's a special section just for that. So we simply must consider these things and understand and do the simple things, which is simply communicate as best you can. Let people know as best you can. It's simply because, listen, I already told you before, don't get emotional over it. I'm just simply saying what I know and experience on the ground, because we sit and we deal with people. Have you ever counseled somebody who had drug addiction? Have you ever counseled with some woman who's been raped? Huh? Have you ever counseled with families, have to do an interdiction to go with someone who's an alcoholic? But I lived that. And when I go there, I can't go there talking like I'm so smart. I gotta find where the man is or where the woman, and I gotta reach them where they are. All I'm simply saying is consider how some people are viewing it. I've said this with even in our administration, you know, sometimes we talk so factual or, oh, check the record. I say, people don't check the record. People listen to what you say. So sometimes talk to their level. That's all I'm simply saying. So we must do the best we can as it relates to the execution and deliberation of this to be able to ensure that there is actually no abuse, notwithstanding what is written. And then I still agree with the simple fact that you could still only do your best. So I commended the draftman on this from the beginning because I could see the intent. You follow me, Ryan? I follow you. I can see the intent and I can see the diligence, but I also can see how some people, and you can't save everybody, through their own folly, will look at some of these things, misinterpret it, and abuse it. We have a very, very good program with the community policing. We have a lot of intervention from a lot of other different societies. What I simply recommend is partner with them. In many instances, don't even just give them information. They know how to reach their people. Support them and let them disseminate certain things directly to how people where to go. Let them drive these strong warnings into a lot of our school children because peer pressure is serious. You can say what you want, but that rumor running around school, them children gonna believe that. And they gotta act on that. And then when they get catch with something, they end up in reform school. Or if they're over 18, they end up not only just getting a penalty, but actually being convicted and therefore qualifying for the same expungement sometime soon. This is not a panacea. This is something we have to face. We are facing it, and we'll have to roll with the punches as regard to this. This issue would have been settled in court eventually in any event. And the medical use is beneficial to a lot of people. There is place in the global market for us, but there will be a battle of market shares. There'll be a battle of market shares. There's not everything a government can do. But I hope at the end of the day, we just brace ourselves for the expected challenge and also do our best to simplify the communication. With that, Madam President, with that I rest.
Thank you for your contribution, Senator. The Honorable Raming. As many. Thank you, Senator Ruben Rabi. Are you tabling some? Are you tabling? Is something that you need to table?
I'm tabling it for.
Please execute your signature and put on the date so that I can pass it on to the clerk. Provided there's nothing in there, I wouldn't want to touch it. But if you're tabling something, please do so now, Senator Rabi. Greatly appreciate it. The chair recognizes Senator the Honorable James Roll Turner.
Good morning and good afternoon. And thank you, Madam President. I don't know, is Senator Raming passing something around the table?
Yeah.
You know, I must confess that even after almost 3 years, it is still a pleasure to be in the midst of most of you. There are those who are not present today, so I could not say all of you. But even as we move along in this life, things that are familiar, that cause some hurt, continue to happen. We see that our dear brother Miles LaRoda lost a son. And you know, there's not much you can say to a person when they lose someone that close to them. But time has to heal some of those wounds. I also share with you that in Grand Bahama, I think our most senior immigration officer, Greta Knowles, just lost her husband this past week. And there again, Madam President, there's not much you can say to someone who loses someone that close to them. And then even in our community, I think many in the legal profession knows the attorney by the name of Carlson Sherlin, who also passed away and was a man that was making a lot of contribution to our society. I spoke with his children, and there again, what do you tell people who lose someone that close to them? I want to express my condolences to all of those families, and there are others that I could name, but I want all of the families that have suffered some type of loss to know that I share in that loss with them. You know, it was a long time ago that I was taught that death is the final enemy. In earlier days of my Christian life, I really didn't understand it. But as a man now who has lived the Christian life for many years, I understand when it is said that death is a part of our life, and I can tell you that every single time it happens, it hurts somebody and many others. But I take comfort in knowing that there is coming a day when there will be no more pain, no more sorrow, and death will no longer exist. But even beyond that, I say to you that there will be a fantastic day of reunion where those who have gone before us will meet up with those of us who love the Lord. So I say to you, it is wonderful to be a Christian. And even though we sorrow, we don't sorrow as people who don't have no hope, because we know there's coming a reunion for all of those that love the Lord. I stand to make my contribution to this cannabis compendium bill, and I must declare that this is really not very complex to me. As I reviewed what was presented, it reminded me of credibility, required structure, a commitment, and a sense of compassion. Credibility, first of all. In many yesteryears, in many circumstances, many times, and so many places, we all know of credibility being so questionable because people say things that are appropriate at the moment, but oh, in so many cases, they really don't seem to mean it. So we say nowadays that listen to what they say, but watch what they do. This government, this current government, when it campaigned and communicated with the Bahamian people, they spoke of what was called at that time in their blueprint for change, at that time, of several matters. And one of those matters that was committed to the Bahamian people was this matter of reviewing this cannabis reform and its legislation. Well, here we are today with the delivery of yet another commitment as the government aims to maintain a global standard in this environment that's associated with the cultivation, production, and the use of cannabis products. Yes, Madam President, I, like many Bahamians, would publicly declare that there are some opportunities for many individuals in this environment. But what is more important to me today and at this time is to declare that, as the government suggested in their earlier communication to the Bahamian people, yes, it has advanced. Now, I must declare that Senator Russell and I travel many places together, and he will tell you that I am not given to much of the street talk and the street slang. But if I may this afternoon borrow the words of a street vendor to me, allow me to join him in his quote to me when he said to me, he said, "Senator, with this government, it is so said and so done. And to me, that is credible behavior."
Yes.
Now to the second matter I see here, this whole thing about a required structure. I am aware that there has been a lot of discussions as the matter went through its consultative stages. And this is not new because, yes, there are some things that are continuous. The presentation of this cannabis matter does not catch most Bahamians by any surprise, because we know that the majority of our population have been asking for a consideration, especially as it relates to medical purposes. Now, we are considered members of the third world, or as some here would prefer me to say, members of the developing state, as I suspect. But because we are developing, it does not mean that we are free for all or the strongest alone should survive. The reality here is that we have been presented with an appropriate structure to ensure that standards are met and kept, and that there is a well thought through, proven elsewhere structure for this cannabis industry. There are strict and measured controls presented to ensure that the regulatory framework associated with this cannabis industry advances in an appropriate manner. We know that it includes stringent controls on such medications. We also know that it includes strict controls on quality. And we know that there are public educational programs attached to this industry. We know that law enforcement is also organized, and it is critical here. And we know that public health and safety are well accounted for also. This is a well thought through piece of documentation. Now, I talked to you about commitment. Commitment is akin to a strong belief in an idea or a system, and its behavior is that which often drives success. We know that with tourism, we are considered among the leaders. We know that for the foreseeable future, we must protect and drive that which is naturally an advantage to us. But we also know that our country is required to explore, diversify, review, and present to our people legitimate opportunities that should be available to them. And this cannabis industry is one of those things. We are aware that among a number of opportunities are the following with this presentation of this cannabis industry. By legalizing some of the use of cannabis, we will likely create thousands of new jobs in agriculture, in healthcare, and in retail, which certainly has a positive and stimulating effect on our economy. And the truth is, it can certainly affect many of the islands. Legalizing cannabis will boost local business sales and provide new opportunities for farmlands. And we know that there are many elements, many portions of land masses that exist throughout the Bahamas. Of course, for the government, there are opportunities for increased revenue. We know that for our administrators, it's another revenue stream that can aid in managing our growing country of many islands. A healthy cannabis industry will attract foreign investment and Bahamian partnerships not legally available today.
That's correct.
There are reasonable export potential associated with this industry. And surely there will be ancillary industries established associated with the presentation of legal cannabis use. Packaging, brandings, transporting, marketing of these products will all emerge because of the new industry in the Bahamas. Now to this final matter to me of that of compassion. I don't know. I don't know. You know, I must declare that I really don't like speaking of Hurricane Dorian much nowadays because it remains a traumatizing experience for many of us in the northern Bahamas. But sometimes I know that those who live in the land of plenty, untouched by these disasters, can't always appreciate the lingering effect of certain devastations. But because I must speak of it occasionally, I am committed to doing so. Hurricane Dorian could be spoken of like a cancer to us. Cancer is a devastating illness that affected and continues to affect mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, cousins, aunts, uncles, children, godparents, friends, the wealthy and the unwealthy. It simply does not seem to discriminate. It is almost like death, you know, because death is certainly one of those things that does not discriminate. When it's your time, it's your time. We know that cannabis has proven to be a vital aid for cancer patients. It helps them to combat the severe nausea and vomiting caused by chemotherapy, I'm told, thus enabling them to maintain an appetite and subsequently gain some strength during treatments. And I can tell you, if you have ever really been close to a patient under cancer treatment, it is something to see. So when there is an opportunity to aid them to gain some strength to be able to carry on, we have an obligation, if we call ourselves decent, honorable lawmakers, to be committed to ensuring that everything that will comfort the ill is afforded to them.
Yes.
This is one of the principal reasons why I stand and support this cannabis bill. If only for the patients of cancers, mothers, fathers, and others, we ought to stand for this. You know, Madam President, they wanted me to keep it short, and I could really sum it up right here. But the medical benefits go far beyond just cancer treatments. Relief of multiple sclerosis, sleep disorders, glaucoma management, mental health benefits, epilepsy and seizure disorders. And if cancer has not touched you as yet, HIV and AIDS certainly must have touched you. Symptoms, these type symptoms can all be helped with the treatment of medical cannabis. A further move of compassion, Madam President. You know, I heard earlier here, a further move of compassion is that this act also provides for expunging the criminal records of those who really only had small quantities of cannabis. And sometimes we don't think about it, you know, but with these small quantities of cannabis that these people have been caught with, it certainly affects their lives. There are many business establishments who, once you have a speck on your criminal record, they simply won't even employ you. Madam President, I am satisfied that the true tenets of these such bills, that of credibility, required structure, commitment, and compassion, have all been addressed. As such, I do stand and support this cannabis bill. May God Almighty continue to bless this land we call the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Honorable James Roll Turner, for your contribution. As many? The chair recognizes Senator Honorable Quinton Lightburn. The chair recognizes Senator Honorable Michael Halkitis.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I move that the business of the Senate do suspend until 3 p.m. this afternoon. at which time Senator Lightburn will make his contribution.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the business of the Senate is hereby suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many hours in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The business of the Senate stands suspended until 3 p.m. 22nd of July 2024.